When a WooCommerce checkout stalls out, the standard reflex is to throw hardware at the problem. Operators immediately buy massive server upgrades or a premium caching plugin, hoping brute force will push the transaction through. But these expensive hardware reactions almost universally fail to improve completion times. Adding server RAM or CPU capacity cannot speed up a delay that exists on an outbound network connection, nor will it force a third-party payment processor to answer faster. WooCommerce checkout latency is a measurement problem before it is a hosting problem. To permanently fix a stalling cart, you have to dissect the checkout request into distinct sequential parts, rather than guessing at infrastructure upgrades. A checkout request behaves entirely differently from every other page on your store. This diagram illustrates the divergence. Standard product pages rely on full-page HTML caching. The server holds a finished file, so when a shopper clicks, that file is delivered instantly. Checkout pages, however, mathematically must bypass that cache. The cart contents, tax calculations, and shipping rates are completely unique to each individual shopper. Because there is no finished file to send, this uncacheable reality forces your web server to compute and build the page from scratch on every single request. Consequently, checkout speed exposes the raw, uncached processing capacity that cached product pages normally hide. This chart shows a 2-second checkout broken down into a 4-layer diagnostic model. We start by isolating layer 1, network and TLS. Long before WordPress loads, the browser has to resolve your DNS, open a TCP connection, and negotiate TLS security. You can isolate this exact time footprint using the curl command in a terminal. By running the write-out option, the output variables expose the precise gap between the TLS handshake and the first byte of server data. The latency budget for this initial network layer is under 150 milliseconds. Anything exceeding 300 milliseconds requires immediate investigation. If this layer fails, the delay happens out on the network before the origin server has seen a single byte of the request. Upgrading your web hosting plan here will accomplish exactly nothing. Moving to the second layer of our chart, we examine the server response, measured as time to first byte, or TTFB. This tracks the exact duration from when the web server accepts the request to the moment it hands off to the PHP process. The latency budget for this specific layer is strict. A healthy environment targets under 800 milliseconds, with an absolute failure threshold of 1200 milliseconds. Keep in mind, a cached product page often processes in roughly 16 milliseconds. An 800 millisecond uncached target illustrates just how much processing burden a dynamic checkout request demands. If your time to first byte breaches that 1200 millisecond threshold, your hosting environment lacks the raw compute power required to handle dynamic e-commerce traffic. The chart now progresses to layer 3, PHP execution and database work. This is where the heavy lifting happens. Inside this segment, WordPress bootstraps the environment, WooCommerce recalculates the cart totals, and the database processes complex tax and shipping rules. Running a performance profiler while logged in as a WordPress administrator distorts the measurement. The admin bar adds its own processing load and script executions that an actual anonymous shopper never encounters. To get perfectly accurate backend metrics, use an anonymous incognito shopper session. Open the browser's developer tools and read the native server timing response header, which exposes the exact database and PHP read times. Standard database diagnostics often fail to capture checkout issues because the MySQL slow query log defaults to a 10-second threshold. No checkout query will ever take 10 seconds. You must manually drop the long query time setting to 0.2 seconds during your testing window to make these specific delays visible in the logs. A failure in this third layer directly points to unindexed database queries or excessive plugin bloat. It's a failure of code efficiency, not hardware. Finally, the fourth layer, the payment gateway round trip. When a shopper submits payment, your server makes a blocking outbound call. The local PHP process pauses completely, waiting for the third-party processor. Because this external delay happens off-site, buying a bigger server does absolutely nothing. You diagnose this layer by stepping away from your server entirely. Read the latency logs inside your payment processor's own dashboard and compare those figures against the local request timestamps in your order log. Failing to recognize this layer results in an expensive misdiagnosis. You end up spending thousands on server upgrades to fix an external API delay you do not own and cannot control. Up to this point, we've measured a single shopper. Under the heavy load of a flash sale, a second constraint takes over: worker math. Each uncached checkout occupies exactly one entry process slot for its entire duration. With 25 PHP workers and a 2-second checkout, those slots fill and empty rapidly, yielding a capacity of 750 checkouts per minute. But if checkout slows to 4 seconds, slots lock longer, instantly halving your throughput to 375. Once every worker slot is occupied by an active checkout, any new shopper attempting to buy is forced into a holding queue. High-performance servers like Lightspeed will hold those queued connections for exactly 120 seconds. If a worker doesn't free up by then, the server times out and throws a 503 error. Store owners routinely misreport this symptom. A checkout that spins for 2 minutes and then crashes is the exact signature of a saturated worker queue. Low checkout latency mathematically dictates the maximum sales volume your store can physically handle before the worker queue collapses. Rely on a diagnostic matrix to map the 4 layers. Layer 2 requires an environment built for uncached processing. Layer 3 bottlenecks need query optimization or dedicated hardware. Layer 4 is external, but 503 errors require a VPS upgrade for more entry processes. Buying new hardware is only a valid strategy when you have the empirical data pointing to the exact architectural constraint you are paying to remove. To ensure your data is valid, review the strict testing protocol. Always measure latency as an anonymous shopper, never while logged in as an administrator. Use terminal commands to cleanly separate outbound network latency from the actual server response time. Manually lower the long query time threshold to 0.2 seconds before reading the logs, or the database will ignore the very queries causing the delay. Dissect the request, map the latency budget to the exact layer, and isolate the bottleneck before spending a single dollar on upgrades. Replacing panicked guesswork with targeted, layer-by-layer measurement is truly the only reliable way to scale a WooCommerce store.